And joining me now is Republican Congressman from Ohio, Mike Turner. Thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. I want to get to you on Iran and the latest assessment of the U.S. strikes there. But first, I want to go to you, of course, on the news that's playing out on Capitol Hill. The Senate is voting on amendments to their version of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Where do you stand on that bill? And do you feel comfortable supporting the Senate version of this bill?
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. This has been a very important process. At its core, the most important aspects of this bill is this is about, continuing the tax breaks and the tax code from Trump's first term. And this is incredibly important. And then adding to it the most important provisions of Trump's continuation of his tax promises for his second term. And then additional policy issues that have been debated both in the House and the Senate. And those core provisions, I think, are incredibly important, both for getting our economy moving, making certain that, we affect the budget in a positive way. So far, as the debate has unfolded, I think the decisions that have been made have been important. There have been some policy decisions that, as they've unfolded, have had some negative consequences that have gone along the wayside, that I think it's best that those did not make it ultimately in the bill. Some provisions in which I opposed, and I think those debates were resolved positively. I think what we're seeing evolve and come out are ones that are important.
I would say, would you vote for this bill the way it is now? It sounds like you're saying you're very positive for it. Would you actually vote for it if it came to the House?
Yes, we'll have to see what the final thing is. But yes, at this point, I think this is going to be a very positive bill, and I think it's going to be something that's going to be very important, both for the economy, for the president's policies. We'll have to see ultimately what the final bill is. But at this point, I think this is going to be positive both for the American public, for the economy, and for President Trump's policies.
And the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that the Senate version of this bill will increase the national debt by $3.3 trillion over the next 10 years, even more than the House version that you initially voted on. It also, the CBO says, will lead to 11.8 million people, nearly 12 million people losing health insurance by 2030. Does that break, you think, with the president's promise not to cut Medicaid?
Well, it depends on how you look at these provisions. I mean, first off, on this, it does include some spending provisions. There are important aspects of this bill that include increased spending and defense. Those are going to be incredibly important, including provisions for the president's spending for a missile defense shield. That's going to be important as we look to the threats that are evolving both from China and Russia. On the issue of health care, there are provisions in this bill that are going to cause people, if they make the wrong decisions, if those individuals who are not working, for example, who are getting health care benefits, who have the ability to go and work or to enter the workforce, choose not to do so, will lose health care benefits. Now, I think those provisions, I think most people in America believe that people who are eligible and have an ability to work should do so. So I think, if there's a calculus in this bill that the people are going to choose not to work, that they lose health care benefits, and I think that's their own choice that you're going to be seeing. But overall, I think people look at this as reflecting the values that are important for encouraging economic growth, encouraging people to get out into the workforce, and also giving us the tools to be able to grow our national security.
We also got some news over the weekend. Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina came out against the Senate bill, and then he proceeded to announce that he will not be seeking re-election. Your House colleague, Don Bacon, also announced he will not seek re-election. What does that say, you think, these two lawmakers are seeking not to run, about the Republican Party, given that these are seen as two key centrists in the party?
Well, there are also a number of Democrats that are making the decisions not to run again. I think people make their own individualized decisions that don't necessarily have to do overall specifically with either this bill or with the administration of the environment. I mean, Don Bacon has been in this decision-making mode, every cycle. He is. I have a great respect for Don. He's a great friend of mine. He's a great legislator. He certainly works diligently across the aisle, and I think it's been great that his district sees him as that champion for working across the aisle and has continued to return him. I wish that he would reconsider and run in his district, because I think he is that champion for a strong voice across the aisle, and has worked, I think, for the people in his district.
Yeah. Congressman, I want to turn now to another important issue that I said I was going to turn to, which is Iran. I want to play what the United Nations nuclear watchdog said yesterday about his assessment of Iran's nuclear program. Take a listen.
The capacities they have are there. They can have, in a matter of months, I would say, a few cascades of centrifuges spinning and producing enriched uranium.
So you heard it. He's saying it's a matter of months before Iran could resume enriching uranium. How confident are you then in the president's assessment and the Trump administration's overall assessment that Iran's nuclear sites have been, quote, obliterated, as the president has stated?
Well, you have to understand the difference between what he's saying and really what the president's discussion is about. I mean, the president is talking about specific enrichment facilities for which, 30,000-pound bombs were dropped upon. These sites were obliterated, and that as those bombs impacted them. Now, there's been a discussion, I think wrongly, of leaked materials of which people have commented on that really we haven't had the, because they're classified, rightly so, because they go to very, the most, I think, sensitive of materials that the United States has. They shouldn't be out in the public for discourse, but they go to, other people who've seen materials who don't really even have access to looking at these sites. But you don't really have an assessment of really what has happened at these sites. What the guy who's the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is discussing is they also have other sites, they have other capabilities, they have other ways in which they could restart their program. Now, you talk about whole facilities, you talk about their program, you talk about enrichment, but you're not talking about these specific sites where these specific bombs fell. Now, we'll have to do long-term assessments as to what occurred at the sites where these bombs fell. But you have to also understand where these bombs fell, it's not just an issue of what are the structural damages that occurred. These had nuclear materials at them. So you can't just walk into the door and determine, what damage has occurred, because they are very contaminated, very dangerous sites within which to go to structurally, but also because of the contamination that's there. But that doesn't mean that forever they don't have the ability to go someplace else or in some other way to continue their aspirations. And that's what the problem is with Iran. It is a terrorist state. It's a state that has nuclear aspirations, and they're going to continue that unless we have, bring them to the table, which is what the president said. They need to begin to leave their terrorist state aspirations. They need to leave their nuclear aspirations and become a peaceful state.
The president certainly said that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. I want to ask you about another issue while I have you, which is a senior White House official confirmed to NBC News that the White House plans to limit intelligence sharing with lawmakers, including yourself. You're the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee. So I wonder, how comfortable are you with that move by the administration, given the fact that, of course, Congress is seen as a co-equal branch of government?
Well, I really don't take these discussions as a serious inhibition in the work that Congress is doing. We'll have to see exactly how that plays out. I think Congress will continue to have access to intelligence and have access to intelligence in ways that are important for us to do our job. I think what's important is, that certainly that they find ways to ensure that leaks, specifically leaks that can impact our national security and the ways in which we do business, are addressed. Because the aspect of people misusing intelligence in ways in which they try to impact the outcome and hurt the United States is the part where we have to be most concerned.
Yeah, well, it is a very newsy Monday, so thank you so much, Congressman Mike Turner, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.